Despite the fact that it seems like we just set up for January, January is actually half over now, which means it's time to start thinking about February. Don't worry, we still have half a month left, there is plenty of time to get things done, and you certainly don't have to be setting up for February already, but this journal wasn't for me, it was for somebody else, so I actually set this up in November. This one was called the Giveaway Journal because I gave it away, and I was so pumped to recently receive a picture of the person who received this journal looking very enthusiastic about opening up the box and seeing all of the goodies. Along with the journal itself, I also gave them some tapes and some stickers so that they could add in some extra decoration themselves. And for the decoration in this setup, we're going to be using this PET tape. I originally got it off Journal Say. I don't think they have it anymore, but if I can find another link to an alternative that looks the same, I'll put that in the description box below. I love this tape. I think it's absolutely gorgeous. I used it in my own journal back in September of 2024, and I thought it'd be really fun to use in February for kind of like a self-love theme. Like technically yes, you could call it a Valentine's theme, but February 13th is Self-Love Day, so I think it's still fitting regardless. The layout we're setting up here though is a monthly dashboard, which has 3 separate sections for different pieces of information. I didn't go and put any headers on these because I wasn't necessarily sure who this journal was going to when I set it up, and I wanted there to be a lot of flexibility in the layouts so that they could use them however they needed to. An example of how you could use a layout like this would be to collect tasks that you want to do across the month in 3 different life areas. So for instance, maybe one for work, maybe one for personal tasks, and another one for learning or leisure. The person who won this said that this journal was going to their daughter, so given that they're still in school, maybe they'd want it for 3 different life areas related to school kind of things. So it could be related to their studies, related to any clubs or sporting groups they're part of, and then just related to like personal maintenance or self-care kind of stuff. As said though, those boxes don't come with any headers, so there's a lot of flexibility in how you'd use this one. I called the page this month ... mainly because it is the first layout in the journal for this month, so it felt like an appropriate way to start the month off. In terms of timing, from first touch of the pen to final touches, this one took about 6.5 minutes to set up. That time of course doesn't include idea generation or planning time, but as a good approximate guess you could probably just double the time for that, so we'll say about 12 to 15 minutes for the layout. Of course I am using a similar style for each of the monthly dashboards in this journal, so that roughly 6 minutes of planning time was spread across 6 different setups, so effectively like a minute for each month. But on the right hand side of the spread we're setting up a cover page. I wanted to utilize more of the tape here. I really wanted to highlight a lot of the different elements and designs they have in it. As said, I love this tape, I think it's gorgeous. I probably personally would prefer it if it didn't have the kind of holographic shininess over it, which is certainly saying something because I do love some holographic shine, but it'd be really cool to find a version of this tape that had more of a kind of matte finish. Regardless though, I think it's gorgeous. I ran a big panel of that tape down the right hand side of the page, and then just put in a simple header using the typical cursive that I'm using throughout the entire of this journal, along with a little highlight of my feature color, which is red. This one was done using an Artron Olive Calligraph pen, mainly because I feel like the red selection in the Tombos is a little bit lacking. Like yeah, we've got some darker ones, we've got some kind of pinky tones and some orangey tones, but I do wish they had more. While they have a very substantial range of blues, the reds, not so much. As can probably be expected, given the simplicity of this layout, just having the tape, a header, and a simple border, this one took about 2.5 minutes to set up, but if I had gotten a little bit more particular about how I wanted each of those elements to look down the right hand side, maybe which pieces in particular I wanted from the tape, that would have added a lot of time having to cut them all out and arrange them, but by just putting the tape down as it was printed, that one was quite quick. Flipping over, the next layout we're setting up is a monthly log, this one done in the style of a monthly calendar, mainly because I wanted the start of month pages in each of these monthly setups to be kind of familiar, dependable, with a similar style each time. That means that every month gets a calendar style monthly, all of the box dimensions are the same each time, and the arrangement on the page is the same. So 4 days on the left hand side and 3 days on the right. I was kind of just hedging my bets here and hoping that our giveaway winner is a right-handed person. Not because any shade towards left-handed people, it's just that I find as a right-handed person, it is easier to work in my journal if I align my calendar this way, with there being 4 days on the left. Mainly because when I'm trying to write things in that Sunday box, which is on the very right, at least my hand has something to lean on. I'd love to know, let me know in the comments, are you left-handed or right-handed or ambidextrous? I think it'd be really cool to have more functionality with my left hand. He's kinda useless. He tries, he means well, but he doesn't really do a stellar job of most things. This calendar though was the start of seemingly many stuff-ups in this setup. It's always unfortunate when you're trying to make something for someone else and you want to make sure it's beautiful, you want to make sure it's perfect, or at least as perfect as we can have it, because perfection is not necessarily attainable, but you just don't want to have it riddled with a whole bunch of mistakes because you're giving it away. You want that person to have something that is nice and feels put together. I stuffed up where I put the highlights, I stuffed up where I put some of the lines. Thankfully it was all kind of easy, fixable mistakes, but it would be nice to not make the mistakes to start with. One solution to this is penciling things in before you go and put the pen down. That probably would have helped me in a couple of instances, but I did plan all of these layouts in a digital format before I came in and put them into the journal, just because then I wouldn't have to erase any pencil lines after I'd put down the pen. I hope our giveaway winner doesn't mind too much, and I do feel that when you put these white sticker labels over the top of any of the mistakes, they are quite hidden, they're not very noticeable. And at least February is the shortest month of the year, so if it does bother them, they don't have to deal with it for quite as long. The monthly log setup took the longest in terms of all of the layouts we're setting up today, coming in at about 16 minutes. One of the ways that I sped myself up in terms of this was free-handing all of the coloured highlights. I was originally planning on possibly going in with the masking trick so that I got really crisp, clean edges on the red pen, but doing that on each of the pages would have certainly added to the time taken, so I just tried my best to be very careful, notably with the pre-mentioned mistakes. Careful enough? No, probably not. But even with the mistakes, with the easy fixes that I put on top of them, I still think that this one came together quite well. By having the calendar positioned, so we have 4 days on one side and 3 days on the other, this left a nice large strip of space that I could put more of that decorative tape in. And I also went and fussy cut around some of the individual elements and sprinkled those onto the page. But I thought that this little spot in the bottom corner would be a good opportunity to put in a quote. The one I included was from Brené Brown, saying, "Talk to yourself like you would someone you love." Along that kind of idea of this being a self-love theme, I wanted it to be more about the love of one's self rather than the love of another, though I suppose this quote kind of covers both. It's been a decent amount of time since I've used a calendar in my journal that has the kind of like fiddly cutouts. Because I'm doing cyclic planning, it means that all of mine are just perfect rectangles. I don't have any of these little inlets of space. So it was kind of a fun project to go back to a more traditional calendar structure, ones where we don't have a perfectly uniform rectangle, and consider how I could arrange my decoration to fit in with those, make sure I didn't have any sections of kind of awkward white space. White space isn't really my friend. I'm not very good at working with it. Flipping over, and the next layout we're setting up is a habit tracker, or a routines tracker, or just a tracking page effectively. This one's going to be set up using mini calendar designs, using a nice and handy printable that we have available in my little shop. That one's also linked in the description box below, along with any other materials that I've used in the setup. These ones are structured to be the same shape as the monthly calendar, with a little box for each day that can be coloured in depending on what happened. So maybe colouring it in one colour to say something got completed, versus colouring it in another, or not colouring it in to say that it didn't. This is another one of the layouts that I really wanted there to be fairly decent consistency with, going from one month to the next. So I made sure to include the same number of mini calendars on each of those iterations. Not only does this mean that the giveaway winner can select the habits or routines that they want to keep track of and just keep track of the same things every single month, hopefully seeing some improvement in their completion of those, but it also meant that for me setting up the layout, I knew the structure and spacing I was going to use each time, and that made me a little bit faster with every iteration of setting up this keeping track of page. Of course, in the idea of flexibility, I didn't want to dictate what they're keeping track of. I also didn't want to dictate this as a habit tracker, if that's not terminology that really resonates with them. So I left a highlighted section for them to add in anything they're keeping track of themselves. I didn't specify a key that they had to use in terms of how they want to fill in these trackers, and I titled the page Keeping Track Of. In amongst the little trackers, we have some pockets for decoration, so I cut out individual heart elements from the tape and stuck those on the page as well. Finding ones that perfectly fit into the spaces I had was a little bit tricky, but after cutting out all of the mini calendars by hand, because I don't have this organized on my Cricut. This one took about 7.5 minutes to set up. If I had to rule all of those calendars in myself, it certainly would have been longer. But on the right hand side of this spread, this is where we're putting in a 1 line a day layout. This could be used for just a general summary of the day. It could be used kind of as a gratitude log, writing down a daily win or a highlight, a small snippet or a small memory. There are a lot of different ways that you can use a 1 line a day structure, but effectively the page just has the header, which is 1 line a day, the second line highlights for each of the days from 1 through 28, a simple border, and then some small decoration pieces. I tried to build consistency throughout all of the layouts that I set up in this one by using the same decorative elements in terms of the tape, in terms of the headers, the lettering style, but also consistency in whether I did or didn't rule the boxes. You'll have seen that so far all of the different sections have ruled edges around them, because even though it's not necessarily something we would consider to be a decorative feature, it does help build cohesivity throughout the layouts. In terms of timing, the 1 line a day page took about 4 minutes to set up, and then it was time to flip on over to what I'm going to just call the play space. This is effectively a spread of infinite possibilities. All it really gets is a header bar and some simple decoration, because as said, given that this journal was going to somebody I don't actually know, I can't necessarily predict everything they might need. By having this space with just some minimal decoration so it still feels cohesive with the rest of the layouts, it means that they can include any other layouts they might want, or at least any other that are going to fit on these 2 pages. There was also some spare space in the back of the notebook they could use, just in case there wasn't enough room for quite everything they needed. But in terms of timing, the play space took 1.5 minutes, and then we're into the weekly layouts. For each month in this journal, I decided to do a different structure of weekly. So rather than doing a different style of weekly for every single week, which would have taken a lot of brain power to figure out, I instead decided to use the same style for all of the weeks that fall within an individual month. This not only meant that it didn't take me quite as long to set them all up, which was nice. This first one took about 8 minutes to set up, but every subsequent one took 6.5, which I think also goes to show that if you use the same style of layouts time and time again, you do get faster at them. So with the times that I'm reporting for these, if you're sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, like how did she figure that out so quickly? I could never set up this spread in that amount of time. It is definitely something that gets faster with experience and practice, but also by having the same style of layout for an entire month, it means our giveaway winner has the opportunity to practice in it, get a real feel for how that layout works, whether it works for them, and then when they set up their next journal, they know which layouts in particular worked best and they can bring those ones forward. It can sometimes be hard to tell if a weekly structure works for us when we've only used it for 1 week, because not every week is going to be exactly the same as the one before it or the one after it. So trialing it over multiple weeks gives us a better appreciation of whether it's something that does or doesn't work for us. In terms of the general structure of the weeklies though, you'll see that we have some decoration that sits in the top left and bottom right corners, and the rest of the page is just filled with second line highlights, done in 2 columns. This style was very much inspired by Anna of Anna Bruns here on YouTube, and it's effectively like a pre-decorated daily log space. So with each day you come in, you write down the header for the day, which is just like the date, like Monday the 3rd or whenever it is. And then underneath this, you write down anything and everything you can think of, anything you need to do in that day, kind of brain dump your thoughts if you want to, just making it take up as much space as it needs to. Once the day is over, either because you've gotten to the next day or you've gotten to the end of your kind of productive time for the day, you then write in the header for the next day and do the same process again. This means that each of the days of the week just take up as much space as they need, and any extra space that you have left over could be used for long form journaling, notes, or anything else you want to include. This is kind of similar to how I like to use my journal, which is primarily with daily logs and a simple weekly dashboard, though we don't have any weekly dashboard structure on here. But as said, in having some different structures for our giveaway winner to experiment with, I hope they'll be able to find their journaling style. Journaling style is actually what we have coming up on the channel next week as part of our live stream, so thinking about how you can find your planning style, what are the different types of planning styles there are. So if you want to make sure that you don't miss that one, be sure that you're subscribed to the channel. After 2 of the weekly spreads though, then I wanted to put in a mid-month review. It'll be around that point that they'll be getting to the middle of February, so it's a good opportunity to check in, re-motivate ourselves, consider what our intentions were for the month and whether we're on track to hit them. I'm a big fan of reflection and goal setting processes like that, so I wanted to make sure we had these pre-structured sections in the journal already so that they could use those. The mid-month review has 8 different sections, On the left hand side, they have a box to write out anything they've achieved in the month already, so any tasks that they set out to do for the month that have already been accomplished, a space to write down anything that's incomplete, either because they've started it and it hasn't been finished, or it's kind of been neglected, a spot to write down any challenges they've faced, and another box to write down anything they've learnt about themselves from those challenges, or technically from anything they've achieved. But then on the right hand side, our boxes are for taking forward and leaving behind, so things that they either hope to do more of or less of, a spot to note down their priorities for the rest of the month, things that they want to make sure that they're focusing on, and then also a list of anything they want to do before the next month, in this case before March. I consider those things to be different, the priorities in the before the next month section, mainly because one of them is more so something that I actively want to do. Maybe I set out to do it at the start of this month and I just feel like it really needs to get done this month. Normally those things are related to goals or projects that I want to work on, and I want to make some decent progress with them. Whereas the before next month space is really just for anything else. These are the ones that I don't necessarily want to pull quite as much of my attention, my focus, my energy, but it still would be nice to get them done before the new month comes. The mid-month review took about 11 minutes to set up, and then we're back on into weeklies. Now, you know how I said before we had some mistakes in this setup? Well, this spread was definitely one of those. Not just in terms of like putting the lines down on the page and needing to neaten things up a little bit, but after this one, I actually forgot to put in the next weekly and went straight on into the end of month review. Once I realized that, I felt so bad. I was like, oh gosh, do I stick these pages together? Do I put in a tip in or something? Like, how can I fix this? I came to the conclusion that I was just going to put in the last weekly after the end of month review, but still working on the one we have here for week 3. This one again took about 6.5 minutes, and as said before, it was just really nice to see that even with practicing the layout once and then drawing it again for the second and then third and then fourth times, how the time taken with each of those iterations just got a little bit less each time as I got more familiar with the structure. In terms of like, where am I putting the decoration? What sizing am I using for these second line highlights? If you're looking to make your journaling process a little bit faster, then using the same styling for your layouts time and time again certainly will help speed you up. I personally find though that if I use exactly the same layout every single time, I do get a little bit bored with my journal, but I guess there are also other ways to change up your layouts, even if the kind of base structure is the same. For instance, on each of the weeklies, I have been making sure to use different elements from the PET tape. Yes, the decoration is still in the same corners, but the pieces I'm using are different on each of the layouts. Flipping over though and getting into the incorrectly placed layout, this one is the end of month review. So it has some sections that are similar to the mid-month check-in, but a couple of differences to make it more of a summative thing rather than kind of like planning for the rest of the month. This one has 9 sections, those being wins, memories, needs to try, highlights, challenges, learnings, this month and next month. As said, some of those are the same, so we're not really going to rehash those ones. But in terms of the needs versus to try section, normally when I think about this, it's in terms of setting up my journal. Of course, this journal is already set up, so they probably aren't going to use it in that way. But it's very much thinking about the month ahead, and is there anything that I kind of need to address, anything I need to plan for, prepare for? Is there anything in my systems or routines that isn't really serving me or needs to be addressed? Whereas the box for things to try is all about novelty. This could be about a solution to a problem, or it could be about just having fun, experiencing new things. The highlights section is for recording some kind of highlight from the month, something that stood out as a bright moment, hopefully in a positive way. Wins is similar to the accomplishments or achieved section, just thinking in a more summative sense for the month. And as for the this month section, I left that one intentionally vague because I wasn't too sure what our giveaway winner was going to want to record. This could be about media consumed, books read, movies watched, that kind of thing. It could be a similar take on the kind of accomplishment section, just thinking about a particular life area, or anything else they want to record there. Technically speaking, they could go and cover up all of the headers I've included and use this in a completely different way if they wanted to. But once this layout was set up and decorated, and I realized I'd forgotten a weekly log, I then had to flip over and put in that forgotten layout. I felt so bad. It's like, this is the second month in the journal. Why didn't we count ahead of time? One of the ways you can safeguard yourself against this is, of course, writing things down on little sticky notes that you want to include, going and sticking them into your journal so that you know you have enough space for everything, you've got the sequencing correct. Did I do that? No, but I can keep that in mind for next time I'm doing a setup like this. Just like the last weeklies though, we have the decoration in the top left and the bottom right corner, all of the second line highlights, and then the simple border around all of the spaces for writing in. I like this kind of weekly daily log hybrid. It's got a little bit of structure, you know, sectioned off spaces for the decoration, but the way that you actually use it is much more akin to daily logging. Of course, you could tweak this structure to make it more structured, so putting in the headers for each of the different daily sections. But flipping back so that we can flip through, I love this tape. I know I already said it, but I really do. I love the contrast between the punchy red and the black sections and the white, and even though it's only minimally related to the idea of like Valentine's and self-love and stuff like that, I just thought it was suitable for the month of February. That, and I was also actively trying to make sure that the color palettes I was using from one month to the other were distinctly different, and given the color palette for January was a lot more bright and fresh, kind of citrus colors, going to something that was a bit more red and moody was a fun change. If you wanted to see that setup and any of the other ones that we have for this journal in particular, then the playlist on screen here is the next one to check out. That one has the initial journal setup, all of the monthlies as they get released on the channel, so click or tap on that one and I'll see you over there.